Hello and welcome to Today in the World, where I'll be talking about news from around the world again and my thoughts. So today I will be going over Venezuela again because there have been some developments. It's getting pretty nuts down there now. They've been toppling statues. It seems like there's mass protests all over the country, and there have been unconfirmed rumors that have been going around, but they're totally bunk, I think. I also want to discuss the tensions that are going on between Israel and Lebanon. It's getting heated in the Middle East also. Fantastic, right? Also, the Italian Prime Minister, Gregoria Meloni, is in China right now, meeting with Xi Jinping, attempting to improve economic relationship between the two of them. So, and then lastly, I'm going to talk about the Sudan because there's not only is there almost a civil war happening there, but there's also heavy food shortage there. And I don't really see anyone else talking about it, so I'm just hoping to inform you guys about that if you haven't heard anything about it. So Venezuela first. In Venezuela, there's been a lot of videos circulating about how they're toppling statues of Chavez, who was the previous leader there. He started the whole socialist program. He was using the oil reserves in the country to finance a lot of social programs, so he was quite popular there. But anyways, they're toppling his statues now. And I get why they're toppling his statues. You know, their whole socialist system is not really working out for them right now. As a side note, I feel like Western countries could learn from this. You know, maybe the socialist system, maybe communism, it's not great. Unfortunately, I feel like people are just not smart enough to get that lesson, even though we keep seeing it over and over. But anyways, side note. Back to the statue thing. I get why they are toppling statues of Chavez. I would get why you would topple statues of Stalin, you know, or if they were going to topple statues in China, I would get if they would topple statues of Mao. Because I think it's totally reasonable to topple a statue of a guy like that. But I think of all these statues that are being toppled right now in Venezuela, and then I think of the times where the U.S. was removing statues. And it's like, why? You know, I know why they did it, their whole reasoning, you know, but everybody does bad things everybody does bad things. So it's an insane standard to just remove statues because someone's done a couple bad things in their life. Like, great people do great things, and that's something we should remember. Just my take on it. Not a huge fan of the toppling statues thing, you know. Anyway, there have also been unconfirmed rumors that the military sided with the protests and then Maduro fled the country, but it doesn't seem like there's any stock in those rumors at all. So if you've been hearing that, I would absolutely just disregard it, because currently the military and the police have remained loyal to the current administration. We can see that in the way that the government's been dealing with the protests. They've been shooting tear gas and rubber bullets into the crowds of protesters. And local officials have reported that around 750 people have been arrested. There have been some NGOs that have reported that several people have died already. We'll find out as more news comes out. And the defense minister of Venezuela has described the protests as a coup by the opposition government. That's what they got to do. As of today, it looks like there's still no voting tallies being released to prove who actually won the election. And I know recently Biden has come out and Lula has also come out almost demanding the release of the Venezuelan voter tallies. We'll see if we ever get those tallies or not. It's going to be interesting. These are the tallies that the opposition government are looking to get released, and then there are a lot of world governments that are also looking for that to be released. The fact that they haven't been released at all just seems kind of suspicious. And there are quotes on the ground from protesters as well that are happening right now. Um, Protesters are urging the police, urging the military to not take the side of the government because you're our neighbors. And so they're just like, yeah, they'll totally side with us because they're Venezuelans too. I would love if the logic of that argument worked out anytime the government called for repression against its citizens, but it never does. Not never, but it's so rare to actually see the police and the military stand up for the citizens rather than follow the orders that they're handed down from the government. There are just like so many recent examples where the military or the police will just follow orders without any regard to how it harms the citizens. And in situations like this where you're protesting clearly a corrupt government, clearly a dictator, you can't rely on the police or the military to help you out. And this is the problem with losing your guns. Yeah, it's there's a lot of situations where it's just not a good right to lose. So anyway, yeah, and maybe they will stage a revolution in Venezuela, the people, but successful revolutions are few and far between. More often than not, you'll have a revolution that fails because the military will follow orders of the government. So it's going to be an interesting situation. Maybe we'll see the police and the military side with the protesters, but currently it's not looking that way. And there have also been several South American countries, Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, Panama, Peru, the Dominican Republic, and Uruguay, who haven't recognized this government as legitimate. So I guess we'll see what happens there. It's going to be an interesting situation because the violent protests and violent riots against the government are only going to lead to violent repressions if Maduro does remain in power and if he has the backing of the military. So the situation there can only really get worse. I guess we're just going to have to watch what happens, monitor the situation. So I'm just going to move on to the heightening tensions in the Middle East. It's kind of a powder keg area of the world, and I don't see a way in which it's going to get better. I feel like it can only get worse. It looks like, I don't know. The Israeli Defense Force sent an airstrike to the Lebanese capital of Beirut and have claimed they killed one of Hezbollah's senior military commanders. They're also making claims that he's been responsible for the majority of Hezbollah's advanced weaponry like precision-guided missiles, long-range rockets, and UAVs, as well as execution of attacks against Israel. They said this was done in retaliation for the deaths of 12 youths over the weekend in a rocket attack in the Golan Heights. Lebanon and Israel have been exchanging strikes and rocket fire the whole time that the Gaza thing was happening. It's mostly just been in the background. So this is just really another tense situation in the Middle East. And I personally don't see how this situation doesn't escalate. Diplomats, though, are expecting the response to stay within the boundaries of the ongoing conflict without provoking all-out war. I'm hoping that happens. I guess we'll find out if Lebanon or Beirut or Hezbollah decides to respond to the airstrikes. So, and I just wanted to add a little humorous anecdote on top of the story that I thought was a little humorous. The Canadian foreign minister Melanie Joly was discussing this with the press, and she seemed to have trouble finding where Israel was on a map. And I had to wonder to myself, how do you become the foreign minister of a country and you can't point out where countries are on a map, especially ones where we've had like recent violence that's been worldwide not worldwide violence, but like it's been in the worldwide press, and you can't point out the country. It's a little embarrassing, and I thought it was a little humorous. Um, and I'm just going to move on to my next story about the Italian Prime Minister, Gregoria Meloni, who is in China holding a meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. She's hoping to relaunch ties with Beijing after leaving the Belt and Road Initiative. This was an initiative that was going to build transport and digital infrastructure links from Asia, Africa, and Europe. And Italy had initially left after pressure from the United States, which strained relations with China. Interestingly, even though China has been lobbying the EU members to oppose more tariffs, Italy indicated they would back the tariffs. I'm kind of interested to see if this comes in at all during their meeting, or how, like, will she change policy when she gets back to Italy? Will policy change at all? Will she still be behind these tariffs? It's just going to be some interesting things to see what happens there. And yeah, the rest of the European Union, they put these tariffs on because they're worried about cheap Chinese goods flooding their market, because a lot of Chinese firms have been stepping up exports due to weak domestic demand. So these tariffs have also been ratcheting up tension with Beijing. During her trip to China, she met with the Chinese premier, and they had signed a 3-year plan. They haven't released the details of the plan, but hopefully we'll get a good look at the details, and we'll see how that will affect Italian markets. It's going to be an interesting situation. It's like a lot of these global news situations where there can sometimes be tension worked in, or we can see how these leaders of governments kind of react to each other, how they deal with each other. I find it wildly interesting. And I'm especially interested to see how the meetings play out in the backdrop of the huge tariff hikes on the Chinese electric vehicles. So I will keep updating the story as more information comes out. And I want to get onto the Sudan story, because there's not only war happening in Sudan, but there's also a food crisis and a humanitarian crisis happening there. So for anyone who doesn't know, there's been a war in Sudan since April of 2023 between the army and the Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, and this has left tens of thousands dead there. There's also been like a pretty large humanitarian and food crisis happening there at the moment. There's actually worry that this could be the biggest famine, I think, since Somalia 2011. I could be wrong about that. You can correct me if I am. So I guess, yeah. The U.S. has put together talks, which Sudan's government accepted, and the RSF has also accepted. And I haven't gone over this yet, so I just quickly will touch on it, who the RSF is for people who don't know. They are a paramilitary group in Sudan, the Rapid Support Forces. And for a while, Sudan was being run by the head of the Rapid Support Forces, General Mohammed Hamdan, and the army chief, General Abdel al-Barhan. But it looks like General Hamdan, the leader of the RSF, has ambitions to be the sole leader of the country. So he has pushed the RSF and the military into a conflict. And then the U.S. invited them to peace talks in Geneva. And this is the first time in months they're sitting down together. And because of the war there are estimates that a fifth of the population has been displaced, as well as a large famine happening across the country. Both sides have been accused of war crimes for targeting civilians, as well as looting and obstructing humanitarian aid. And there's also been a bit of dismantling of the healthcare system. It wasn't fantastic in Sudan. It's been a pretty weak system, but it's kind of all gone now. Yeah. It's pretty rough in Sudan right now. And yeah, it's one of the worst famines in decades. The U.S. is sponsoring these talks, hoping to stop the violence and enable humanitarian access to the country to prevent what looks to be mass starvation and death. It's not official, but my take on the situation, there's probably been a larger supply of weapons to the Sudan than there has been of food, because both sides are being supplied by different countries, and the humanitarian organizations are having a hard time getting food into the country. Aid organizations have been trying to help people who get it, and the army has been impeding the flow of food because oftentimes the food needs to go to the western area, which is under RSF control. And because of the food shortage, the RSF has been rampaging across Sudan's breadbasket regions, which is making the food shortage worse. I haven't really seen a lot of coverage for this, so I wanted to talk about it today because it's a pretty serious situation. So hopefully the peace talks go well. And that's just another situation that I'll monitor, and if anyone's listening, I'll keep you updated on it. If I've missed any international stories, please let me know. I can be reached via my email, todayintheworld2024@gmail.com, or the comment section wherever you watch this. Also, if you're wondering how I get my news, a lot of it comes from Ground News, and the rest is from X. I don't use Google because Google is kind of insane and they can censor stories and they're extremely misleading. If you haven't seen it already, they've been preventing the autofill of the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. You won't get any autofill features for that. It's wild. Anyway, I hope this was informative, and thanks for listening to me. Next time, I will continue to monitor the same stories and I'll probably bring you some new stories and let you know what's happening today in the world.